Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. I'm your host, Derek Hensley. I'm a wealth advisor at Sound Stewardship. We are a fee-only financial planning and wealth management firm in Overland Park, Kansas. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague and partner of the firm, Jonathan Harrison. So we're going to have a fun discussion on estate planning and kind of look at some common mistakes we see that we'd love folks to avoid if possible there. So thank you, Jonathan, for taking some time out of your Friday to talk with us here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Fun estate planning is not always, those two don't always go together really well.
That's true.
But
That's true. But we're going to make it fun.
we'll do our best. So I thought before, or as we get started here, it is always good. Let me bring the slides back up. Always good to remind everybody, in case they don't know us very well, that we're not attorneys. We don't pretend to be attorneys. We don't play attorneys on TV. So everything we're talking about is general estate planning information. We're not giving you legal advice. So if you're looking for something very specific to your situation, you should talk to your own legal advisor. But we are certified financial planner professionals. And as part of that, an estate plan is a really key component to a financial plan. And so we're involved in that a lot of the times in conjunction with the estate planning attorney. So that means we unfortunately see when things go south.
Yes.
So that's why today we're framing it on the most common things that we see go wrong. Most of them aren't technical issues. They're more mistakes that could have been avoided by, so it's not like the will had the wrong clause in the state of, Kansas versus Oklahoma. It's issues more along the lines of the estate plan really not being put together in the way that the client was hoping for. So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and what I'll add too is, as we're going through these slides, as questions come up, feel free to use that little Q&A little icon there at the bottom of the screen there. And so just send questions as you're thinking of them, and we'll have some time. We might answer them in real time, or definitely at the end, we have some time there for questions. So feel free to just fire them off as they come to mind.
Yeah. In fact, even as you're all here for some reason, whether it's your own estate plan needs to be updated, you're wondering about estate plan for a parent or a child. I don't know what may have brought you here, but I'd be curious if you, even now, before you see the presentation, what are the questions that you have? Go ahead and submit those.
Yeah.
So that, by the end, we make sure we cover them. But I would love to hear, like, why is it that you thought on a Friday over lunch hour, hey, it'd be fun to sit in an estate planning workshop. I know it's a topic that a lot of people have like somewhere in the back of their mind, and it's usually when someone is coming to us, they to like start a new financial plan. I would say a lot of them, the estate plan is one of the main reasons that they're like, I need to get that set up because it's been important but not urgent. It's been back there as kind of brewing, but it's one of those things that I'll get around to someday. But unfortunately, if you neglect the estate plan, it has really profound consequences for those you leave behind. And so when we're doing our financial planning, we use these 7 principles of sound stewardship to really cover the comprehensive plan. And one of the issues that causes serious headaches or sometimes even great financial loss is lack of really the principle number 6, thinking beyond yourself.
Yeah.
It's all about, it's not about you, because in the most case, you're probably going to be gone when all these issues are going to be found. It's helping the people who are behind you. And a key way to do that is by setting up an estate plan that blesses those around you.
Yep. Very much so.
All right, so let's jump in. I have 10 mistakes for us to cover, and I'll go pretty quickly. The number 1 mistake is, of course, not having a written plan. It is astounding to me that a recent survey, so this is 2024 numbers, 32% of Americans have a will, so less than a third, meaning 68% of people don't have a will at all. It's like I said, it's one of those one-day things. And I put not having a written plan because even if you don't have a will, you have a plan. Your plan is just going to be mandated to you by the state of Kansas or state of Missouri or whatever state you're living in. And it is just astounding to me the people who don't have a written plan, including, I mean, I don't know, you hear in the news all the time a celebrity passes away,
Right.
has millions of dollars that they just didn't like thinking about it.
Yeah.
Derek, what in your experience as a planner, what are some of the reasons that people don't have a written plan in place?
Some of it can be age. It's like, oh, well, I'm in my 30s or 40s. Like I'll get to that later. I'm focused on
Yeah,
these other things. I have other fires I got to put out. And so some of it's that. Some is just they don't like having conversations around this stuff. They don't like talking about kind of
yeah,
death and legacy. And I don't know if it's not so much from like a guilt standpoint, but it's just something that's like, yeah, I just don't like to do that thought exercise, and I like to kind of keep that on the shelf there.
yeah.
So
Well,
those are some common things I've seen.
and you're thinking about your own, eventual demise.
Yeah.
So that's not fun. But you're also you have to make decisions, and sometimes it's when you don't know the answer, like who's going to be the guardian for my kids,
Hmm.
or who's going to take over as my healthcare, decision maker, that healthcare power of attorney, if I can't do it. If you don't have a really clear answer right now, it's easy to put it off and not make a decision. And unfortunately, that's when people get into some pickles.
Right.
So,
Right.
okay, so that's the mistake. What's the number one recommendation? If they don't have an estate plan, what should they do next?
Yeah. If they don't have a safe plan, they need to get the ball rolling and get something in place. And so what I like too is now there's so much software around this. Like, yes, that might that might be a little band-aid. You still might need to work with a estate planning attorney, and there's good reasons to do it. So just because it's in place doesn't mean you're across the finish line. But if you're like, hey, everything's just running so hot right now, I just get something going and in place, and then fix the band-aid, the patch job later or whatnot. But let's get
Yeah.
movement here.
Yeah, I would say if you're listening and this is you are one of those that don't have a written plan. Like next step, just email or call an estate planning attorney.
Yeah.
Say, I need a plan, and just get the
Yeah.
ball rolling. They'll have the process. It costs, depending on what you're looking for. We can talk about cost real quick. Most attorneys charge somewhere between 2,500, 2,500, or $3,000 for full package like trust, will, financial power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney. Those are kind of the key components to an estate plan these days. So that's a meaningful expense, but for most families, it'll save them many more thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, to have that, or if they don't have that in place. You can get it online, I think, LegalZoom.com, trustandwill.com. A similar package is at about maybe $800 these days.
Yeah.
It's a lot
Maybe.
less, but you just don't have anything tailored to you. It's the difference between having a house that's literally copy and paste and a house that an architect designed that said, "Oh, I know the family's needs."
Yeah.
It's always the estate plans that I see with an attorney involved are way better. But like Derek said, if cost is a factor, you just need to get something in place.
Yeah. Well, and you got to realize you're making a trade-off where, oh yeah, I might go cheap here, but there could be things that are missed or issues
Yeah.
that come up later that's going to cost me more. I say you more, you're gone, but you
Yeah.
know, I was reading a story where a former Supreme Court justice put together his will. He's like, he's a Supreme Court justice, like he knows the law, right? Well, he puts together this nice simple will. It ended up costing over hundreds of thousands of dollars in court costs because it didn't have some clauses in there, some details in there that an estate planning attorney would put into place for you. And that's another thing I'd add too is when you're looking for that professional to work with to put the estate plan together, make sure like that's their bread and butter, right? So you can see a lot of different attorneys out there that might do a whole lot of other things, and those can be fine, but just really vet that person well to make sure like, or is this like what you hang your shingle out on, or is this just one of like 10 different things you could do for me, right?
Yeah.
So making sure you're getting that expert in the area of estate planning versus you're getting a bankruptcy attorney that's going to
Yeah.
put together a will or something. So
Right. Yeah, my cousin's a litigator, so he's gonna, copy paste a will for me, and then you look at it and you're like, oh boy, this is bad. So
yeah, and we got one of our questions came in is, can you explain the differences between wills and trust and when it's appropriate to use each in estate planning?
yeah, that's great. Great question. So, a will is the kind of the backbone of an estate plan. That is literally it's your last will and testament. It's you writing out your last instructions to say, here's what I want you to do with my stuff. It's also where the details of like guardianship for your children is listed. So what you should do with my stuff, what you should do with my children if something happens to me. That's the backbone of the estate plan. Where that goes if you pass away, and then one other thing on that is the person you assign to take care of that is called the executor, or sometimes called like estate representative. But the executor, they're responsible to like call the bank and say, hey, my spouse died or my so and so died. So that's a will, who's it's cleaned up by the executor. The That goes before a probate court, and a judge has to say, okay, if Derek passed away, this is what he wrote out he wants to have happen. The state's gonna make sure all that happens. And then where, I said no written plan, if you don't have a written plan, the state just has the rules that say, okay, it's going to go to their spouse. Okay, they're not married, then it's going to go to their children. Oh, if they don't have kids, it's going to go to their sibling,
Right.
so there's a whole parents. And so there's a whole like chart that the state uses that in a lot of cases is way off of what the family would want, but also costs a lot because that you have to pay the court expenses, and that's many, many thousands of dollars. But most people think, oh, if I have a will, then that avoids probate, but that's not true.
Right.
Probate is just the process where the state makes sure that your will gets carried out.
Yeah.
So that's a will. A trust is an entity that you create. Sometimes it can you can create it now and it doesn't actually kind of come alive until you pass away. For most people, they create what's called a living trust, where it's alive now. You can actually put stuff in it. And then what happens is, unlike, your will, which says, hey, if I die, my bank account should go to so and so. If your bank account is in your trust already, when you die, it doesn't have to change. The title doesn't change. It doesn't get directed through your will because it's already someplace else. So like your house is a common one that would get titled to the trust. And then the trust gives instructions not to an executor like your will does, but to a trustee. They can sometimes be the same person, but who's then responsible to say, okay, here's what their trust says I should do with the money. But it's a slightly different entity. Trusts can go on for years and decades, and in some cases, century or more. But a lot of times they are used to distribute it. So they are often the vehicle. For instance, if somebody says, well, I don't want my 18-year-old child to get $1 million from a life insurance policy if both me and my wife pass away, this trust, with the help of the trustee, will distribute it out to them as they actually need it over time. And when they get to a responsible age, I'll give them more and more. So that's the difference. Will and a trust at a very high level. And then the other key planning documents that need to be in place are power of attorney documents, one for financial, one for healthcare. These are all about you're still alive, but you can't make decisions for some reason. You've been in a car wreck, you're in a coma. The doctor's saying, what do we do? If you don't have that healthcare power of attorney, in a lot of states, even your spouse can't tell the doctor what to do on your behalf. The doctor will just have to make their own decision.
Right.
And then financial, would be the person who's able to pay your bills, make sure your mortgage gets paid if you're in a coma, those kinds of things. Very common that spouses are each other's power of attorney, but it's that next person, if you're both in that car accident, that's in there. So that's the key part of a written plan. A will for a lot of families, a trust, and then healthcare and financial power of attorney. There's other components that are specific to different arrangements depending on your situation. But those are the backbone that everybody should have. And specifically, once somebody turns 18, they should have, like for college students, my son's about to go off to college, a year from now, or graduate from high school a year from now. Well, he'll need to get that healthcare power of attorney because as an adult, again, if he can't make healthcare decisions for himself, if I don't have that in place,
Yeah.
the hospital doesn't care that I'm his parent. They might be nice and listen to me, but they don't have to follow that advice at all.
Right. Yeah. Another question we have is, what are, we're talking about trust there. What are some of the pros and cons of maybe having a family member being a trustee versus a third party? I know with trustees, there's compensation
Yeah.
tends to be attached to it and other features.
Let's come
too.
back to that one.
Okay.
I'm gonna speak a little bit more to that one in mistake number 10. So we have to wait all the way to the end.
Stay
but
tuned.
I want to address that one. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
Okay. But we do have 9 more to go. So let me keep moving. They're not all, this one is the kind of the backbone of the others, so that it took a little longer. But I will come back to that question. All right. The next mistake number 2, we see it all the time. This one is the simplest to explain, simplest to fix. Wrong beneficiaries. So it's not enough that you did all this right. You actually built your will. You built your trust. You put it in a notebook. You put that notebook on the shelf. It gathers dust. But if your life insurance doesn't get connected, if you don't change your beneficiaries or your 401k or your IRA or all those accounts, those don't go, in most cases, don't go through your will unless you have no beneficiaries. What, insurance policies or retirement accounts, a lot of investment accounts, they have a beneficiary section that says, here's who should get my account if I die. And if you don't update that, it doesn't matter what you put in your will or what you put in your trust. If you have your kids listed on your life insurance policy, but your trust says, no, they shouldn't get that until they're age 25, a third, and then age 30, a third, and then age 35, a third. It doesn't matter if you put your kid as the beneficiary of life insurance, it'll go out directly to them. So really commonly, I see an issue where their beneficiaries don't fit their plan at all.
Right.
I mean, it may have made sense for a time. Like a common one is, a young couple gets married. Some good life insurance salesman says, hey, you're married now. You need to get $1 million of term life insurance, which is great. They get it. They set it up. And then they put, spouse as primary beneficiary. They don't have any kids yet. So they just say, my mom is contingent or whatever. So that if they're both in a car accident and that $1 million policy, $1 million will go to their mom. Well, years later, now they have 3 kids. I'm looking at the plan and your kids aren't in your life insurance policy at all. If you guys are both in a car accident today, that $1 million will just go to their mom. And the mom might be well-intentioned and say, okay, yep, I want to make sure that $1 million gets used for the kids, but there's no obligation that she would have to. And in fact, if she's in the same car accident or she passes away before they do and they forget about it and don't update it, that money would go out through her estate and the kids may or may not see it. So this one's really easy to fix because, you can reach out to an insurance company or go to your 401k. At least once a year, if not more often, we check beneficiaries for every account, every policy for clients. And then every so often do an exercise that we say, okay, if you passed away, here's where the money would go. And we make sure that that's in place. And one key thing here too is don't forget to add the contingent.
Yes.
That's the backup. Having a primary beneficiary is good, but the contingent. So
yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah. And I was gonna say, I know working with a client that reviewing the beneficiaries, life happens. And so they had a family member it was a contingent beneficiary, but they were set to receive, if the client got hit by a bus and the primary, they would receive, over $1 million. Well, this contingent beneficiary's life, that $1 million would not have been a blessing at the stage of life for this contingent beneficiary. So it's like, yeah, let's pause that. Let's move that around a little bit. So that's part of the review is what's happening in your life and your family's life.
Yeah.
That we need to account for with these designations too.
Right. Yeah. And again, they might have been right for a time, but a lot of times when I look at them, they're wrong now. So
Yeah.
similar to that is unconnected trust. So a trust is this a really powerful tool, but literally saw this um, at the very end of last year where an attorney created a trust, handed the documents, the client signed it, handed the documents to the client and said, thank you, it's been great working with you. But when I looked at the plan, there was the trust says, okay, any money that I have in me as a trust and as a vehicle or an entity, this is what you should do with it. But their house wasn't connected to the trust because it had a beneficiary deed where it would go to the beneficiary that was listed on that deed. All their retirement accounts had different beneficiaries specific to people and weren't connected to the trust. Bank accounts were what's called payable on death, where you can list a beneficiary, which is generally good, but it wasn't pointed to the trust.
Right.
And so there's like one checking account with a few $1,000s. So literally everything in their life that they created would skip the trust, and they just paid the attorney, $2,500 to create it, but
Yeah.
it does nothing.
Yeah.
So, um, what we have to do is we have to go and actually say, okay, I'm going to add the trust as a beneficiary, so that if I pass away, this account gets to that, or title the house in the trust, or there's a number of, and sometimes it's unconnected because similar to the wrong beneficiaries because they just didn't know they were supposed to do it, or sometimes it's like life changes. Commonly, your company switches 401k providers, and it's not unusual for me to see they just forgot to bring any beneficiary designations
Right.
over and defaulted to your spouse.
Yep.
So you're looking at it and you're like, oh, this used to be something different. It wasn't your fault. But again, if the trust doesn't actually have some kind of funding vehicle, it is completely pointless. And so you have to make sure it actually, and that's a lot of attorneys, this particular client's attorneys didn't. A lot of attorneys will help you. They will file the deed to connect your house. They will, tell you, go talk to the insurance company, talk to the retirement, or update your beneficiaries online. But, and that's one of the key roles we play is actually making sure that happens. But similar to beneficiaries, I see this all the time.
Yep.
All right, let's keep moving. Number 4, not as technical, but not communicating your plan. So again, you might have it very nicely put together in a binder, but does anybody know where that binder is? Can anybody else find it? If you don't let people know that you have a plan and at least where it is, it leads to confusion, disputes among your loved ones, and the more communication you can have, you can avoid unintended complications down the road.
Yes. I mean, I know personally had a family member pass away, and there was supposedly a will somewhere, but didn't know where it was at. And
Okay.
then this family member had communicated wishes to one family member, said one thing, said something
Okay.
to another family member, said something to another family member. Well, now they're sitting there with a home that's locked up, and an account that didn't have beneficiaries on there that's
Oh
all
boy.
locked up now. So didn't communicate the plan, weren't checking beneficiaries. It was like, ah! So a lot of other things were already taken care of, but there's still not, they didn't get everything across the finish line and kind of buttoned up. And it's like, it can cause some real pain points around just the communication. It can smooth out a lot of things if you get that right.
Yeah. There's a lot of heartburn around this one because, like we were talking before, it's difficult to bring up.
Mhm.
Um, and it takes some discernment to know like how much do I share? How much detail should I
Yeah.
share? So one thing I'm not recommending is I'm not saying here like you should tell your kids how much money they're gonna get when you die. Don't do that. But you should tell, that executor, the person who's going to take over for you, tell them that they're that, because that's not a fun surprise. Like, oh, you just lost your parent. Like, here's a bunch of work you didn't realize you were going to have to do. Or the power of attorney, that's one where a lot of, the accident happened. The doctor needs to make a decision. They said you were the power of attorney. Hopefully they told you, but you don't know where the document is, and you need to like get that so you can take care of it now.
Yeah.
Do the guardians of your, minor children know that they've been given that role? I laugh because the guardian who would be the guardian of my children asked me this weekend, like, who did you guys pick for that, by the way? Because we're working on that for ourselves. So you don't remember we talked about this. It was you. So
Yes.
you might even need to remind them occasionally. Some clients build a literal inventory of documents, assets, accounts. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Even stuff like, do you want to be buried or cremated?
Yeah.
Where do you want to be buried? Not everybody likes to think about it. Not everybody has very specific wishes there. You might not care whether you're cremated or buried, but it takes a lot off of your loved ones if you have specific wishes to just tell them, let them know.
Yeah. Well, and another thing, I was at a conference last week, and one thing I had not really thought about a whole lot, but if say you're in serving in a role for someone's estate plan, like you're the executor, you're the trustee or whatnot, you may not you may think, oh, well, this was this person's brother. Yeah, I can share with them, but you need to know like what you can and can't say in those roles too, right? And so
Yeah.
because there could be relationships there where um something strained and they're carved out of the estate plan and they didn't want them to see the documents or whatnot. So it's
Right.
just kind of being sensitive to that side of the coin too when we're looking at this common mistake.
Yeah. And so this gets back to like communicating how much. Um, had knew a family where the dad communicated to the children,
Yeah.
or at least one of the children, that I'm leaving you a nice amount that you won't need to worry in the future. Well, what the child heard was a specific dollar amount. I never met the father, so I have no idea what he had intended. But the child heard like, oh, and to be honest, I don't think they save as much for retirement as they maybe would have otherwise.
Mm.
Father passed away. Mother lived for much longer after, including a long time in a long-term care facility. Fortunately, the father had saved really well, and her husband had set up. He was really the kind of main investor in the family, but that used a lot of those resources. And for most families, what was left for the children would be a good inheritance. But compared to what that child thought they heard, there was a big difference there that led to some anger. Honestly, I don't know where that if that anger was for the mom and the fact in her expenses. It led to anger.
Yeah.
Um, and so again, that was a mistake of something was communicated, but understandably not very clearly.
Yeah.
That led to mismatched expectations that wasn't great. But that's a mistake. All right, keep it moving. Next mistake. Forgetting charity. This is I would say 9.5 out of 10 estate plans that are set up before we work with them. This is an issue. Many of our clients are intentionally generous with their wealth. A lot of them tithe to their church, a lot of them give to charity, and then you look at their estate plan and there's no church or charity involved whatsoever. And that's because there's kind of a default that the attorneys just say, oh, we're just going to assume you leave this all to your kids. But giving at death, often for people, if they do that, if you give 10% of your estate, it's for a lot of people the biggest donation
Right.
ever made in their entire lifetime. If you have $1 million life insurance policy and tithe and 10% goes to church or charity, that's $100,000 gift that most people couldn't write that during life. So I think I'm not putting this on anybody if they don't want it as part of their plan, but when I share that with families, a lot of times they're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
There's a lot of different ways you could do this, like that tithe I mentioned. Some use a strategy called child called charity, where let's say you have 3 kids, and so your default estate is going to be split up 3 ways. A child called charity is you just add, a fourth child that is your charities. And so now instead of 3 ways, the estate is split 4 ways. And then it goes out to charity. Even if nothing else, there's something in your plan called remote contingent plan. A lot of times is the name for it. That's like, what if you and your kids are all in the same car accident, goes, off a cliff, and
Hmm.
you have all this money, like who does it go to? The remote contingent plan usually just says, whatever the state of Missouri says. And I don't like that in my plan. I want to specify. So I have
Yeah.
some people, but I say, well, then these are the charities that I really enjoyed supporting. Send it to those.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say some are advantages and disadvantages of gifting assets, during your lifetime as opposed to, passing them through a will or a trust at your death?
Yeah. The disadvantage to doing it during lifetime. So in general principle, that Ron Blue, we're certified kingdom advisors, and Ron Blue is the kind of the founder mentor of that. And he says, do your giving while you're living so you're knowing where it's going.
Yep.
This idea of like enjoy the giving
Yeah.
and get to see how it's being used and stewarded. But for some families, particularly if it's a large gift like that, it wasn't related to giving necessarily, but like that other couple, you don't know maybe what end of life costs will be. You don't know how long you're going to live. You don't know if you'll have long-term care needs. And so a lot of families, understandably, don't want to give away too much of their assets now and then run out later in
Right.
life. That's understandable. But, depending how much faith is a component of your life, too, that God will provide. And if you are feeling called to do a gift now, then that's certainly now, whether that's a gift to charity, but even a gift to kids. A lot of times, there are some families that accelerate kind of a state
Yeah.
gift.
Family gifts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
saying it would be more helpful for my kids, younger in life, earlier in their
Hmm.
careers, to get this gift. Um, and some joke that, and they just know that, I'm gonna have to move in later if I give them too much and
Right.
not out. But um, so that's the kind of the pros and cons there.
Yeah. Yeah.
The last thing I'll say about this one is a donor advised fund is the way to do this. That is a separate account at a foundation, and that if your will or trust points or beneficiaries points to charity through that, then if you move churches, 10 years from now, you're going to a different church because you moved different, different part of the country. You don't have to go to an attorney and say, hey, can you change my entire trust? You just change the plan with that donor advised fund. So
Yeah.
what we'll actually do after the webinar, we'll send out an email with some links, and one of them is how to use a donor advised fund.
Yeah.
Um, all right. One thing also that I'll say a pro on charity that leads into mistake number 6 is another great reason to include it in your estate plan is if you have pre-tax accounts like an IRA, 401k, IRA accounts that when you take the money out, you're going to have to pay tax on that. When your heirs take the money out, they're also going to have to pay tax on that.
Yep.
So if you say, well, I want a portion of my IRA or my 401k to go to charity, charity doesn't have to pay tax on it.
Yeah.
So, if to make things simple, if you have a $500,000 house and a $500,000 IRA, and you want a kid to get $500,000 and a charity to get $500,000, if you have the house go to charity, the kid has to pay tax on $500,000. That's bad. But if you swap those and have the charity get everything in the IRA and the house go to the kid,
Yeah.
they don't have to pay tax on the house. Charity doesn't have to pay tax on the IRA. And that is one of the mistakes I see. Number 6, no tax planning.
Right.
So
Yeah.
most
Well,
people they don't have to worry about this because the death tax or the estate tax right now it's $13.6 million per person.
Woo.
If you're married, you get more than $27 million that you can pass on to your heirs without paying any estate tax.
Yeah.
But there's other ways taxes can hit your beneficiaries. The number one is that 401k or an IRA. If you die, you have your beneficiaries have 10 years that they have to pull all that money out. And if
Yeah.
a few beneficiaries are getting really big accounts, that can push a lot of income over
Yes.
a short period of time to them.
Yeah.
And that's a major issue. So
Yeah, and it's not uncommon for the beneficiary to, they might be in their highest income earning years. So, they're well developed in their
right.
career, and then all of a sudden you plop this nice IRA. It's a blessing, don't get me wrong, but it's like, okay, well, Uncle Sam's going to get a lot more of that now than he would have maybe early on in the careers, or maybe some different planning strategy you could have implemented.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I have a specific, this happened in my family. It was a little different because the estate, it was back when the estate planning or the state tax limit, instead of being, 13.6 million per person, it was a lot lower.
yeah.
And, I had a rich uncle. I didn't realize he was a rich uncle. In fact, I didn't realize he was an uncle because I had literally never heard of the guy. It was my Uncle Hank. He lived in a trailer. And the other thing is, not only did I not realize I had a rich uncle, he didn't realize
He was a rich uncle.
because he lived in a trailer park in Topeka, Kansas. And he did have a will. He had a written plan. And it said, I want $1,000 to go to my siblings when I die. And if there's anything left over, send $1,000 more to these charities. And then the rest of it can go to my siblings' kids. So it'd be nieces and nephews. He didn't have a spouse. He didn't have any kids. So he was thinking, I don't have much. Well, what happened? So first to siblings, then some to charity, and then anything left over to the kids. My dad came from a really big family, so there were a ton of kids.
Yeah.
So he was thinking there's not going to be much spread out. Well, he passes away, and they're looking through his trailer, and under his bed, they find all these grocery bags filled with papers. And those papers, a lot of them were original AT&T stock certificates from when AT&T, he worked for AT&T like back in the 1920s or something ridiculous. So these were stocks that he had been granted, and it took a while for them to even just track down like what are these now? Because
Yeah.
stock splits and spinoffs and all these.
Right.
Long story short, $6 million sitting in grocery bags under his bed.
$6 million.
Yeah. So unfortunately, at that time, there was basically 50% estate tax
Oh,
on the first generation of stuff. But then if it goes to another, so that the first generation would be like his siblings, the thousand
yeah.
dollars. But then a few $1,000s went to charity. But then there was another 50% tax. So, there was 3 million basically disappeared off the top. But then of the remaining 3 million, another 50% disappeared when it went down another generation. And so the total estate that ended up getting split was somewhere between like just over 1 million. And it was split between like 35 people. So when you break that down, it was like, wow, that's not, huge. I mean, it was meaningful to my family. I remember when my parents received that, but compared to what could have been done if he did some simple estate planning, I mean, if
Yeah.
nothing else, he could have given, if he wanted to, said, let charity have the rest instead of let the kids have the rest. And charity would have gotten, in this case, over $5 million. Instead, that those charities got $1,000. So, um, so don't do that. Don't be like my Uncle
Yeah.
Hank. Sorry, Uncle Hank, but it was a bad
Yeah.
mistake. So,
Oh, that's tough.
do tax planning ahead of time. All
Yeah.
right, number 7, not updating the plan. Don't get me wrong, having an estate plan is better than not having an estate plan. But sometimes I see plans that are so old they actually cause extra issues. Like for instance, your death that law is covered by your state, and people move states all the time.
Right.
People from Missouri to Kansas, Kansas to Missouri, Virginia to Florida. A lot of people move to Florida or Arizona later in life.
Yeah.
We move around a lot, and so that's a common one. State and federal laws change. We had 2 massive law changes in the Secure Act in 2019 and the Secure Act 2.0 here a couple of years ago. If you had a plan written, before 2020, it's out of date. There's something now. That doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong with it, but there could be something that's majorly wrong with
Yeah.
it.
It needs a review.
Yeah, it's not a set it and forget it
Oh,
issue. It could be you have more kids, you have a different spouse, you have grandchildren now, your kids have a different spouse, all things like that. Either the state changes, your family situation changes, your assets change. And so like back to, updating beneficiaries and getting things titled. If you move houses, like everything you put in place before that could be out of date. So um, I say at least doing a full review every like 3 to 5 years. So every couple of years we do as part of the comprehensive plan. I call it the tabletop exercise where we map out. Again, it's not super fun to think about, but if you die, here's what happens. Here's how much goes to X. Here's how much goes to that. Here's who would take over. Remember back when we talked about executors and trustees? And a lot of times people say, oh, wait, my dad is my trustee or my financial power of attorney. Like he has dementia. Like that's
Yeah.
not going to work anymore. I mean, 10 years ago when I built it, it was great. So it's not, it's someone's fault that
Right.
it's in there. Just stuff, life changed.
Yeah.
So
Well, I know I've helped some clients where it's like, okay, something happened to you guys. Your kids are going to this couple. Oh, well, they are not a couple anymore. So we need to fix,
yeah,
we need to fix that. And
right.
it's just like what's happening in the people around you, what's happening in their lives that might impact your estate plan and be thinking about that too.
Yeah. Mistake number 8 is kind of related to a plan being too old, but a lot of times people forget to include digital assets. These, when I think about these, they aren't necessarily, sometimes they do have financial implications, but they're not always financial, but a lot of times they're emotional implications. When my parents pass away, I am going to have to go through, shoe boxes and shoe boxes of old photos
Right.
and photo albums and stuff like that. When my kids pass away, they don't have that. If they don't have access to my iCloud photos or Google Photos or whatever,
Yeah.
like what happens to those when I die is all in those terms and conditions that you click on without really understanding what they are. And in a lot of cases, if you haven't specifically spelled out in your estate plan that this is what you want to have happen with those, the terms and conditions say they're our property and we can delete them when we want. So your documents, and fortunately, attorneys are getting better. It's taken a few years, a few decades for them to start including this. But this could be things like photos, digital book libraries, your music library, cryptocurrency is
Mm.
included in this. Mileage, rewards points. Work with a client it was $1 million of rewards or 1 million rewards points.
Mhm.
It's not $1 million, but 1 million rewards points. Like what happens to those
Yeah.
when they pass away? That needs to be spelled out in the documents to make sure that it happens the way they want it to.
Yeah.
Easily forgotten. Um, One thing here is that your will or your power of attorney documents can spell some of this out, but also many of the companies now have tools in place as well. Apple has a legacy contact, somebody who will take over for you. Google has something similar called an inactive account manager that can take over if you die. Facebook has a legacy manager. So you can put people in that role directly on the sites. You just need to make sure you do that.
Yeah. Well, and I know, I've read articles of, national articles that are circulating around this topic of, hey, there's a loved one that can't get the thing shut down on Facebook, and it's hard for them to see that stuff pop up on their feed or whatnot. It's like they're trying to grieve and kind of recover from that, and it's like, this is still a thing that I can't fix, and it just kind of can cause some a little additional pain point there that doesn't really need to be a thing if we can just be proactive and get those things set up, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Mistake number 9, too many accounts. So we see this a lot of times after the fact where a surviving spouse or a child of an adult child comes to us and say, "Hey, I need your help," and it makes our role as wealth advisors sometimes feel like private investigators as we're like digging through, just trying to figure out after someone has passed away, what is this? What are the accounts that they had? Because maybe the the person forgot that they had it, the person who passed away, or they just never back, and they're one of the early mistakes, they forgot to communicate those.
Yeah.
So do your beneficiaries a favor. Close unused accounts, even if they barely have anything in them. If you're not using it, close them down.
Yes. Yes.
Document things. It's really common for after a parent passes away for someone to bring in a sack of papers. Hey, I found these stock certificates. How am I supposed to know whether they're worth 6 million or worth nothing? Vast majority of the time they're worth nothing, but it takes a lot of work to figure that out. Maybe they got stock certificates as part of like an insurance policy back in the day, but then that, became something else, or you put those into a digital account and these are just copies or something. If you know what those are, document it. Just at least write a note that says, this doesn't have any value anymore. I'm keeping this stock certificate for sentimental value or whatever.
Yeah.
Just have an inventory so that your beneficiaries don't have to contact. It takes hours. Every account you have is hours for your executor or trustee to work through and figure out like, what do I do with this? I need to get them all the documents, the bank, the documents. And so if you don't need that many, simplify. It'll help
Right.
your life, but it'll absolutely help your beneficiaries and heirs.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything that has a dollar in it, you need to account for it. And so whether that's, hey, we need to sweep that out and close that account, or no, that's one staying. And so I don't know, like you were saying, do an inventory or a net worth statement, but just have some kind of just help the person that's going to serve your estate. Just give them a roadmap, right? It's like, okay, give me the key, give me the map, and then I can go navigate there. But like you said, it is a lot of work on the trustee or the executor to kind of put the pieces back together and get it across the finish line for your estate there. So serve them, love them well by getting things in order as much as you can with this.
Right. Yep. And I think weren't you mentioning a client that recently found something?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like
And so
the person had passed away how long
yeah,
ago?
yeah, it's like 4 years ago, and then we're having a good discussion, and we're looking at something else, and that prompted a kind of re-jog their memory, like, oh, they were doing, sending X amount of dollars a month to this account. I have no idea where that it kind of got put on the shelf as other thing, putting out other fires for this client, and they're like, yeah, that was a thing. We're like, oh, tell us more. And so we're gonna just kind of working on this project to kind of rediscover what it is, and how we can retrieve that for them. But it's very common when you're either serving it's a spouse or a parent, that you're not going to know all the information, so just be prepared for that. But knowing that on the front end is as the aging loved one is still able to like have these conversations with them. Mom, dad, is there anything out there that I need to know about? Any kind of projects we need to work on as you're up for it? So
Yeah. This is one of the reasons we don't necessarily talk about it with the client this way. One of the reasons we create a really detailed net worth statement, an inventory that says here are all the accounts that a person has. Yes, it's for them because it's helpful to manage your life when you can see, okay, here's where everything is. But I would say it's just as much for the surviving spouse or the heirs, when something happens and now we have to work through all those to track them down. Because the financial planners have put that on that document, makes it so much easier. You still have to deal with it if you have too many, but at least having it documented, that's super helpful. So extra tip, missingmoney.com.
That's a good one.
Or maybe you had a parent or a loved one pass away and you're their executor. Missingmoney.com, that's where states go if companies or states themselves say, we have money of like a life insurance policy and we can't get a hold of the beneficiaries. We don't know where they are. They will report it there. And so you search the name of the person, and so a lot of times they're, $10, $20 refunds from, Home Depot that didn't get claimed for some reason or something. But I've seen accounts worth, more than $100,000 that were unclaimed that the state said, well, we just don't know how to get a hold of the person anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So missingmoney.com. Definitely go there. All right. Last mistake of the day. Mistake number 10. Not preparing the next steward. during the process when we're doing estate planning, we put actually on paper or in writing, here's how much your heir will get if you died today. And never have actually, most people have never put that in a dollar format. They're like, oh wait, my kids would get how much? And that happens without them ever asking, like, how will that money impact this person? Whether it's less than they thought or way more than they thought. But seeing it spelled out like that raises questions like, do they know how to manage that dollar amount? Do they know what they're going to do? Do they have somebody like a financial planner that they can call and say like, hey, this is the person who can help you with that? Are you passing down too much at death? How will that dollar amount impact their life? What kind of stress might it put on their marriage or their identity?
Yeah.
What about life changes in that person's life, like disability or divorce or remarriage? How would this inheritance cause issues for them? Will their creditors have access to your beneficiaries' wealth? So if you have people that you're sending money to who aren't great with money, or are in positions with a lot of liability, then it'd be really sad for you to see that, or you won't be here to see it, but for that money to go away. And back to like what we said, is it beneficial for me to use that in some other way, giving now to family or even charity before I'm gone? If that dollar amount, I've regularly shown the dollar amount, and people are like, my kids don't need that much.
Right.
Like that's now some I don't have any judgment around it. I don't know, I don't know who's on the call. I don't know your kids. I don't know your situation. So no, there's no judgment around it. I'm just saying the question needs to be asked.
Yes.
And sometimes, even with dollar amounts that are in the hundreds of millions, the next person's not prepared. They don't know how to manage that.
Yeah.
And so that conversation looks a little different if it's hundreds of thousands, but it needs to be considered. And this gets back to the question I want to answer from the earlier in the call, where I think if I understand the question right, Derek, it was, how do you decide for a trust, for instance, that trustee, the person who's going to help manage it, when to use a family member versus a professional or corporate trustee? Is that
Yep.
and that gets down to this: is the next person prepared? If you have somebody in your life that you're like, then they know how to spell trust, they know like they're good with money, they are very organized, they have the emotional or life bandwidth to do this, then a family member might be a great person. But if they're not prepared, they don't know how to handle it, they wouldn't know who to work with. Or everybody processes death in a different way, and sometimes ignoring the estate is a way that people process and say, I'm just not going to think about that. And if you might not know how your kids are going to respond. And so in that instance, professional or corporate trustee, like a bank trust department, or they'll step into the role, they read your documents, and they say, okay, this is what Derek wanted, and I'm going to make sure that what he spelled out in his trust actually happens. And it splits it from the family, so it's not a sibling, for instance. If your kids get along absolutely great, couldn't get along any better, and maybe a sibling being the trustee to help the others is fine. But if there's any fractures, money is like water, in the sense that, if there's a little crack and a lot of water hits it, like that crack in your foundation is going to widen. If there's cracks in your family when there's not money involved, money doesn't always or often create the cracks, but it adds the pressure and suddenly makes those a much bigger deal.
Yep.
And so a corporate trustee, or even it might just be maybe it's the emotional pressure. Maybe it's not they don't get along. You're worried the emotional pressure is too much. Preparing the next steward is not just the person who might receive the wealth, but also the person who might receive the responsibility to take care of your estate.
Yeah.
I don't know if that addressed it very specifically. It's situational.
Yeah.
But because it will cost money. It's going to cost, let's say, 1% or more of your estate for the trustee to manage, sometimes annually if it's long term. So that can really add up. and you want to make sure that it's needed. If it's not a big deal, then have a family member. But it has to be someone you trust and you know can handle it.
And another thing I'll add too is as you're thinking through all these different scenarios and building out all these contingencies in your estate plan, like I really want people to sit with the question of or the idea like you don't just have to do things 50-50. If you got two kids, it doesn't have to be 50-50. Like really sit and think with it, the question, or we're in the camp of love them equally but treat them uniquely. And I feel like I mean, it's great to have anything in place, right? So if it's 50-50, but I feel like a lot of times it seems like people just phone it in with that, like,
Yeah.
oh, and it's like I don't want to, oh, that's going to cause too much disruption, or I don't want to ruffle any feathers. It's like, well, let's think about it, because we could be talking about a lot of money that's meaningful, and so it's no, let's kind of work through this and think through this here, and so
Yeah.
not just take the easy way out of 50-50 and we're done.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we might need to, maybe one child isn't married and the other one's got two-income household, and they're doing fine. The other one maybe needs a little bit more help.
Yeah.
And it's okay, and just know that, like, give yourself permission to, like, hey, it's not a love thing. It's just, hey,
Yeah.
they need this more, so I'm going to help them more.
Yeah.
That capacity.
Maybe one has a disability
Yeah.
and isn't able to earn an income. Maybe one has addictions
Right.
or substance abuse issues that makes it difficult for them to manage money. And yeah, I love that. Love them equally, but treat them uniquely. And so that's where an attorney and your financial planning team can help get a customized plan that helps you think through that. There's no perfect plan. And I would say it's a process because, like we said, updating the plan, I hope everybody on the call lives a long life and you have to update it again in 3 to 5 years. But is the plan right for where your family members are today? So I think that's all 10. So I think we've answered all the questions that have come in on the fly. But any final questions in the last 60 seconds of our call?
Yeah. So yeah, if those come in, great. If not, as you guys are thinking about what we talked about today, feel free to, you can send us an email. Our emails are, it's just Derek at Sound Stewardship or Jonathan at Sound Stewardship. Feel free to, fire off any questions through that route there. We're going to send a follow-up email with some resources. There'll be the recording of this webinar, and we can have the slides if needed. But yeah, so we're going to provide that. Let's see. Yeah, and so it sounds like some of the attendees have already been using that missing money, and they might pay for a nice dinner this weekend. I don't know. So yeah, it's just a nice resource out there. So thanks for highlighting that as part of this. Just
there you go.
Trying to track down where everything's at and who's getting what and when, and yeah. So yeah, I really appreciate your time on this, Jonathan. Just talking through all these different things to consider as we're talking about estate plans, and there's a lot of things that I work through. So I appreciate you highlighting some of those and putting this together. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Derek, for hosting me. Thank you, everybody.